Now, the events and the craziness that I'm about to discuss about Vegapunk is from chapter 1061 onwards. So if you're not there, even if the anime equivalent, I'll put that down in the description when anime catches up. Then I suggest that, you probably don't watch it, so you catch up first. But if you don't care and you're already caught up or whatever, then, let's get into it, because there's so much that's been revealed with the introduction of Vegapunk that, we just have to talk about all possibilities, every hint that could be a hint, something that may not be a hint that could be a hint. And the first thing is Vegapunk themselves, or really the island Egghead. And I think that's a very interesting name, but at the same time, it makes me think that with Vegapunk being the mad scientist, the evil scientist in the One Piece world, that is a callback to Sonic. Sonic the Hedgehog's, not Sonic, but from Sonic the Hedgehog, the character Robotnik. Robotnik is the Eggman Robotnik. And that makes me feel like this is Oda's kind of way of incorporating that as an inspiration. Obviously, Sonic, the whole franchise being owned by Sega, which is a Japanese company, makes me think that there's a possibility that Oda's probably played the game. Maybe he still plays the game, but at the very least, he's aware of the game. So, Egghead, Eggman, Egg Island. Yeah. That is the first inspiration that I feel like, is there. Obviously, Vegapunk and Robotnik being very talented scientists from very young ages, both of them being able to turn anything around them into great scientific developments, whether it's scrap, whether it's rubbish, whether it seems like nonsense. They're both really great scientists. So I fully expect that, there'll probably be more callbacks to like the Sonic franchise, even though I don't know much about Sonic, as a whole. I've just played the games a little bit. But yeah, now immediately moving on from there, I want to talk about one of the biggest things in this chapter, which is literally one of the biggest things, and that is the shark that appeared. This shark that was chasing Bonnie and attacking the Straw Hat, because that shark is clearly as big as a Sea King. Maybe bigger, maybe smaller, but it could be a Sea King that is just a shark. And the fact that Vegapunk would make this says something. But interestingly enough, Vegapunk is now messing with nature and, artificial intelligence like you would see in a lot of science movies. The idea, so not like the pacifistas, because the pacifistas, right, as we understand them, they just literally have one directive. Do what the person who's commanding you tells you to do, which is more than likely kill the pirates. That's literally all the pacifistas do. They don't really think much. But now Vegapunk's playing with the idea of creating artificial life form that thinks for themselves and does stuff. And not a clone, because that's something else, again, that's different. Artificial life that does and thinks and follows orders, right? And this could be related to the Dragon Project, because Vegapunk did create dragons that, followed their own desires. But even then, maybe that's part of why those ones were left behind and kind of faded, because the dragons just followed their impulses, kind of like the shark right now. So Vegapunk is trying to, manufacture this ability for an organism to think and have its own desires, but to control those desires. And maybe that's what we'll get into, because we don't really have people on this island. So the idea of exploring freedom in context with Vegapunk may come through this want for Vegapunk to create life, but to control it at the same time. The idea of freedom, but letting, the natural sense that if you want to create something living, it's going to have its own free will, its own urges that it wants to follow. And you can't really control that to an extent. Or maybe Oda will go the opposite way and let Vegapunk control them. I'm not really sure what he's going to do. But clearly that says something even about Vegapunk themselves, because Vegapunk, it brings the question, why does Vegapunk want to create something like this? Why isn't Vegapunk okay with just having robotic soldiers that are like the PX, right? They just have one directive and they do what they want. On the other hand, why isn't Vegapunk alright just having Marines there, right? Just have people or just have robots that do simple things. Why does Vegapunk want to go this route of not having real people, but having robots that are kind of like real people? What is the story with Vegapunk and their relation with other human beings? So I think that is something that's going to be interestingly explored with Vegapunk. I'm not quite sure, there's so many avenues this could take. Obviously, there's still a lot more on this shark, because again, like the shark is number 3, which means that Vegapunk has tried this at least with 3 different sharks, and it's failed, let alone other animals like the dragons on Punk Hazard and maybe other creatures around. And There's so many projects that Vegapunk's doing right now that seem crazy and that are interesting. Now, continuing down that trend of different projects that Vegapunk's on, there's the Eddy, right? Because last chapter, chapter 1060, it wasn't fully clear what was going on. It seemed like a new world phenomenon, like this whole eddy that's in the air. But now knowing that we're near Egghead. I'm getting confused with Eggman Robotnik. Egghead Island. We now know that current is probably due to the shark that Vegapunk created. So the ability to heat the ocean that much and the force to push it above sea level to create a giant floating wave in a sense, that is insane as an ability, right? That is, and Vegapunk doesn't even seem to care that that's something that they can do. Right? And I keep saying they because we'll talk about this whole Vegapunk is a she at the end of this video. But, that is just something that is completely insane. Speaking about direct comparisons, we have the robot that Vegapunk used to save the Straw Hats. Not really save the Straw Hats, but defeat the shark, which, mind you, Vegapunk did in one punch. Not that any of the Straw Hats tried, but Vegapunk did it in one punch. So, that's saying something. But the robot that Vegapunk used is so much bigger than the Frankie Shogun, but obviously you can see similarities in the designs between the robot and the Frankie Shogun, like the arms, the legs, the fact that, Vegapunk came out of like this little circular, hatch right in the middle of the chest area there. So there's very many similarities. Of course, we know that Frankie probably was inspired by some of Vegapunk's designs during the 2-year time skip and all of that craziness, but I think it's just insane that, like, Vegapunk, again, a direct comparison. Like, Frankie makes something, like the Shogun, and then Vegapunk comes and, like, makes the same thing, but much better and much bigger. Frankie, in pre-time skip, used to use compressed air, the Kuta burst that he used to, like, do his hands. I can't quite remember. Oh, yeah, I think it was, like, a little thing in his arm, right? And he used to hold his hand like this, and he used to shoot compressed air, and that used to be a very dangerous attack. But not long after, we met the Pacifista, like the very first model, and those ones didn't use compressed air. They used lasers, right? So it's like Frankie's here, but then Vegapunk is like... But speaking about this massive robot a little bit more, I want to note that it's number 12, right? So I don't know if this is part of, a group of them, or maybe, it seems like it would be like the 12th model of all the models that Vegapunk has made, kind of improving them over time. But I want to think that it is one of 12 others because, the name on the side is written the Vega Force, which implies to me at least that there's some kind of army involved. So, that's called the Vega Force. This is Vegapunk's, like, personal army that keeps Vegapunk safe. That's why, like, no one attacks this island because Vegapunk's gonna kill you. If you pass the shark, and when you get to the island, the Vega Force is going to kill you. So, yeah, I want to think that there's actually at least 11 other robots just as massive on this island that can easily destroy the Frankie Shogun. That... I'd like to think that, but that's just what I get from the impression of Vega Force. Moving on a little bit more, I'd like to talk about the island because we see kind of a silhouette of the island, but not that much, which leads to many questions, right? Why is the island in silhouette? One thing that's important that, really came out in the official chapter was the design and the fact that there was this massive egg shape. But in this, in the official, you can see that the egg looks opened and there's so much mist around and it makes me feel like this egg being open means that there's something massive that can come out. That is invented in the egg and hatches, right? Also the idea of, creation and inventing stuff and it hatching and into, existence and all that kind of stuff. But I'd like to think that there's something big that Vegapunk is working on, like Vegapunk's magnum opus. Like, what is it, right? Because we know that Frankie has the General Frankie, and that's what Frankie's super proud of, right? That and the Thousand Sunny, obviously. Thousand Sunny number 1, then Frankie Shogun. But, like, what is Vegapunk proud of? Because Vegapunk does so many things, but they don't seem to be proud of particularly anything as far as we can tell. So I want to think that there is something massive, something incredible in that can hatch from that egg, that Vegapunk is like, this is it. And they're probably still working on it, but the fact that egg opens, I don't know. It makes me feel like there's something there. I don't know. Maybe I'm reaching out straws, but maybe we'll find out when we find out what, the egg on Roger's ship does. But At the end of the chapter, Vegapunk introduces himself and calls himself mediocre in the fan's translation, and calls himself a humble scientist in the official. I like to think that the idea is basically Vegapunk not trying to blow their own horn, in a sense, and that coming from the fact that Vegapunk is essentially the greatest scientist in the One Piece world, is saying something that Vegapunk doesn't really see themselves as that great, right? It makes me think that Vegapunk is probably after something, right? There's probably something that Vegapunk wants to achieve, something that Vegapunk dreams of. One Piece is about chasing dreams, right? And unless you're a Marine, I think it's been pretty clear that all other characters who seek freedom in a sense are all chasing something. Maybe it's something introspective, outrospective, tangible, non-tangible, but everyone is chasing something. And so it makes me think, what is Vegapunk after that they haven't been able to achieve, that makes them call themselves mediocre, that makes them say that they are a humble scientist and that's all that they are? Maybe that may make their goals align with Luffy in the future, so which would be nice, right? Luffy, King of the Pirates, has the best scientists allying with him, maybe not working for him exactly, while, Kaido and Big Mom, who were kind of like second best in a sense, had the second best scientist, Caesar, working for them. But and this coming off the chapter, where we just got Luffy's dream, and then a chapter with Vegapunk who can maybe make that dream possible, where you had Caesar Clown working on Big Mom's dream of having everyone become the same size, or Caesar working on Kaido's dream to create an army made of Zoan users, Vegapunk having to create Luffy's dream of ... makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know. If it doesn't make sense to you, it makes sense to me. But yeah. Now, speaking of dreams and freedom and goals in the One Piece world, I want to say that Vegapunk is kind of like Mihawk, right? Mihawk is not a pirate and he doesn't really, go out there and have adventures like everyone, but Mihawk still seems to have goals and ambitions. He's kind of reached his, but, he still seems to have some kind of purpose that drives him forward every day, why he wakes up in the morning. But also, Mihawk is a character who for a long time we speculated is someone who is good enough in whatever capability or speciality he has to compete with the emperors, right? Whether you want to say he'll win, he'll lose, he'll win to some, he'll lose to some, he'll win to all of them, he'll lose to all of them, doesn't matter. He can compete is the point. Mihawk can do that. And there are several other characters in the One Piece world who've existed who can do that, who are not admirals and not the four emperors themselves. People like Fujitora and Green Bull, before they were drafted into the Marines, simply existed in the world as characters who were simply that strong and were recruited at some point. Someone like Odin probably would have been part of that. Maybe Wang Ji before, as some kind of remnant of the Rocks pirates as well, was one of the people in that group. And if we're going with that idea of Odin being someone like that, maybe there's a giant on Elbaf who is on that level of competing with the Yonko, but, they just kind of do their own thing. And I think Vegapunk in the same way is that kind of person. They are capable of creating, emperor killing machines that Frankie tried to make, right? Vegapunk seems to have robots and inventions that create an impact on a scale that we see only with Master Devil Fruit users, right? Creating an eddy current that floats in the sky, creating sharks as big as sea kings. Imagine having an army of that versus Poseidon. That is an ancient weapon. The idea of having a robot army that can just one-shot all those sea kings. The idea of having, mixing genes, creating warlords that are like what are they called? The Seraphims. They're called the Seraphim. The new model of Pacifista, right? All these things together, essentially Vegapunk on their own. If you came to Egghead Island, I think Vegapunk is as close to someone who can compete with Yonko as you're going to get without actually facing, the classic Yonko, the Shanks, the Kaidos, the Rogers, the Whitebeards, the Big Moms. And that seems like a very good kind of setup for an arc with the Straw Hats, who are now an Emperor level crew. Because at this point, the only people who could stand against the Straw Hats, in a sense, are either Emperors or the Marine Admirals. But now we're in an interesting position where you have Vegapunk, whose sheer creativity and, scientific feat can probably go up against the Emperors of the Sea. And so this is the next arc that the Straw Hats are going to face. So yeah, I like to think that Mihawk and someone like Vegapunk are very similar in a sense that they're very capable people, but their dreams are not as simple as being a pirate and pirate king or being a marine and stopping pirates. They exist in this weird space that they're just capable people out there, right? Obviously, both of them are similar, again, on the government's payroll in a sense, and probably see the government as just an opportunity to pursue whatever goal that they want. But let's get on to one of the real reasons that you probably clicked on this video, and that is the fact that Vegapunk is a she. Vegapunk. She is Vegapunk. For some reason, that actually makes sense to me. Like, before I read the chapter, before I knew it was about Vegapunk, like, I think one of the things that I thought, I was like, okay, maybe Vegapunk is Bonnie. Yes, Vegapunk. And then the more I thought about that, I was like, it's probably not Bonnie, but Vegapunk being a woman actually makes sense. Vegapunk being young, Vegapunk being a woman makes sense. And that's what it seems like at the end of this chapter. Vegapunk is both young and a woman. Now, obviously, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I remember, in terms of age, the only thing that we have as an indicator is that Vegapunk worked in Mads and Vegapunk worked with Judge before Sanji was born. We don't really have a record of Vegapunk existing like over 40 years ago, right? So there's nothing that actually says that Vegapunk has to be over 40. So Vegapunk actually being relatively young makes sense. Vegapunk could still be old, based on some of the things we'll go into just now, but like Vegapunk being this person, and if this person is Vegapunk, this is all we're going to get. It makes sense. They look a bit young. I'd expect Vegapunk to be in their 30s, given that they worked with Judge and everything, but I could see like a kid Vegapunk, like a little 5-year-old kid. This is too big for 5 years old. You can't see it on the camera, but this size Vegapunk working with like Judge and Caesar and, Queen, and probably that's why they don't like Vegapunk, because Vegapunk was a kid who discovered genomes and DNA at the age of 5, which is something that someone that smart could do. So Vegapunk being young makes a lot of sense. Vegapunk being female also makes sense, because I was just thinking, like, what is something that we wouldn't expect to happen in terms of Vegapunk's reveal? And Vegapunk being a woman makes a lot of sense. No one said Vegapunk was a man. It just seemed like that was what made sense. But Vegapunk being female is something that I kind of expected before I read the chapter, because I was just thinking about what crazy thing could be revealed with Vegapunk that we wouldn't expect. And Vegapunk being female is one of them. But let's move on from there. Let's move on from there and let's talk about like Vegapunk's, is this Vegapunk for real? Because the easy answer is that Vegapunk has just modified their own body, kind of like Frankie has his. So, it could just be that Vegapunk doesn't actually look like this, but this is a modified version of their own body. But I feel like that's too easy an answer. I feel like with Vegapunk, we need to go beyond, right? Like we talked about, if Caesar does something, Vegapunk needs to do it even better. If Queen does something, Judge does something, Frankie does something, Vegapunk needs to be far beyond that. So in terms of age, Vegapunk could be older, but it would make sense that Vegapunk's young, because maybe it's related to Bonnie and Bonnie's existence. Maybe Vegapunk is one of those people who has turned young again. So Vegapunk she reached a kind of old age, and then Bonnie made her young, and maybe the government had Bonnie for a while. It would also connect the dots as to why Akainu, when he met Bonnie, just at the end of the pre-time skip, was like he had a chill when Bonnie escaped, because maybe the government was using Bonnie for a time in her life to make their older officials younger again. And maybe they had a plan for her in the future in case any pirates ever, rose up and there was any great force that rose up against the world government. Instead of revealing him, imagine if you had an army which was like the best of the best in the Marines and the world government in their prime. So it doesn't matter whether, it's Garp or Sengoku who've passed their prime, or people like Kobe who was going to reach their prime soon. Imagine if you could put all of those people, current people in their prime, current admirals, people who used to be admirals and people who would probably be admirals in the future, all in their prime, right? Imagine if you had such an army, and you could do that with Bonnie's fruit. You could literally have an army that good if you had Bonnie's fruit. I think I like that idea. I don't know how likely it's going to be. It depends on Bonnie's involvement in the arc, but the idea that Vegapunk is actually older and then they use Bonnie to make Vegapunk younger again, not Vegapunk going through the aging process. We don't exactly know how big Bonnie's fruit works, but the limitations, does it wear out if Bonnie wants it to wear out, or if Bonnie gets unconscious? But Yeah, I like the idea, so that's what I want to put my eggs in, but I know there's other possibilities, and let's discuss some of them. And, the idea is that there's so many things about Vegapunk's introduction that seem a bit off, right? If this is the only Vegapunk, why does Vegapunk have a thing written Punk 2, right? Why is it the second one? Why is it not the first Vegapunk? Right. And maybe there's two ideas that I have here, and maybe one of them is that this is a robot. This is just a robot, and Vegapunk is controlling the robot, which is controlling an even bigger robot. Right. And Vegapunk's actually on the island. Maybe Vegapunk's just a brain at this point. But even though, maybe that, that version of Vegapunk is what Vegapunk actually looks like, but in their younger days. This is a young Vegapunk robot that's been created. On the other hand, this could also just be a Vegapunk clone. Right? Moving on with other things in the chapter, there's a thing that this headphone, this earpiece that they have, and the eye that's being covered, which is very reminiscent of the German 66, which are known for their cloning. So this could be a clone of Vegapunk. And maybe to speed things up on the island, talking again about what I mentioned earlier, Vegapunk's relation with people and not really interacting with other humans, it seems likely that the only person who Vegapunk would want to interact with is Vegapunk. So why not just make clones of yourself, all numbered Vegapunk 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever number of Vegapunks you want. And maybe they can't last very long, but they work together and all that kind of stuff. So this could also just be a clone. But interestingly enough, coming back to the earpiece and, everything with the number 2 and it being a robot, it would also kind of make sense because in the last chapter, they were talking about somebody being inside there. And without really knowing too much about someone being inside there, Sanji looked and said it's a woman. Sanji knew instantly. But this time, Sanji looked and said someone's there. Like, Sanji didn't even know this is a woman this time. So, how did Sanji know last time it's a woman without seeing, but this time Sanji could kind of see the person, but he still didn't know it was a woman immediately? It's very interesting. So the idea of a robot is definitely possible. I like the idea of a clone. I like the idea of Vegapunk being young, being a genius, or maybe having grown older and then Bonnie turning them into a young person again. I like those ideas a lot more than the clone idea. And then we find out Vegapunk is just old man who just makes robots of young girls. That's very disturbing. Ugh. Anyway, guys, as always, like the video if you like the video, subscribe for more content like this. If you know someone who needs to hear the truth, it needs to be more about speculation with Vegapunk. Maybe they still think Vegapunk is an old man. Take them away from that. Bring them to this video, take them away from that thinking, and, let them just enjoy life, be happier, and know that One Piece is not going down that road. As always, guys, like, comment, subscribe. This is King KZ, and I'll see you in the next one. This is not my usual set. This set has been very difficult to put together. I've got my computer and a microphone on a chair in front of me. I've got my iPad there giving me all the words and everything I need to say.